All right. So today we are going to walk through some of the changes to your email stats, the way email stats are presented in the NationBuilder control panel, and some of the additional filter criteria that we've introduced kind of as a collective feature set related to some recent privacy settings that were released specifically by Apple in the last few months. So we're trying to make sure that you have all of the data available in the control panel to see how the privacy settings are impacting your supporters and the information you're able to see about their email engagement and their open activity. So what we're going to walk through today is what is Apple Mail privacy protection, because it was kind of like the spark that drove us to introduce these new features. How the new settings impact your email stats. So kind of like once that was released and once people were adopting the new Apple operating systems on their devices and enabling these advanced protection or privacy protection features, how was that impacting open rates and kind of like changing the way that those are being calculated in a way that was obscuring the data a little bit. What we have, and then we'll dive into like what we've implemented to counteract some of the changes and make sure that the data that you have in your control panel is actionable and meaningful. And then finally, with open rates over the course of time, and I'm going to say this, and it's like a controversial thing, but also everyone on the internet is saying it, but with the reliability of open rates decreasing over the course of time and kind of like a shifting focus on click rates and like other email success metrics, how can we maximize email engagement to ensure that we have reliable ways of knowing if people want to, if people are interacting with the content that you're sending them over email. While we're going through this, by the way, feel free to pop questions in the chat. I will also try to save plenty of time at the end for questions if people just want to unmute and ask. But we'll be keeping track of things. If Annette is able to answer anything in the chat, then she'll jump in there. Otherwise, we'll kind of like stop for questions throughout the presentation as well, just to touch on anything. So Annette, also please feel free to unmute if there's like a time sensitive one. All right, great. So what is the Apple Mail privacy protection? What does that entail? And I might be telling you, plenty of you, something you already know, but I think that this is a helpful place to start. So the thing that started all of this was a new setting that Apple released. I think it was initially introduced in September, was widely adopted by like end of January. I think by the time end of January rolled around, I think roughly like 72 to 75% of Apple users had adopted the new operating system on at least one of their devices. But it was released several months ago, and essentially the Apple Mail privacy protection features allowed individuals to enable one of two settings or both. So I apologize for the graphic on the right-hand side because I know it's like a little distracting, but I thought it was a really helpful visual of what users received as soon as they downloaded the new Apple operating system. And this is an example on an iPhone. The reason I share this too is because for those of you who are Android users, you may be like, okay, great. So are people going into their settings and like digging around and enabling something? The way that the options were presented when someone downloaded the new operating system on any of their devices was pretty, like it was a little bit aggressive in the language. It's basically like, do you want to protect your information or don't you? And so it was one of the first questions that individuals would receive when they upgraded their device to the new operating system and restarted their device for the first time. So the two settings that people were allowed to, or people were offered to enable were one, hiding their IP address, which really just means that it prevents any senders from seeing the recipient's location, which isn't something that we were passing into NationBuilder anyway. But it was a lot of like email clients were using that data to compile, like 20% of your email recipients are located in Los Angeles, California. So disabling the IP address from being visible to senders disables the ability to roll up that location reporting. But more importantly, what impacted NationBuilder open rates and anyone who's tracking open rates in a traditional sense is the ability to load content remotely instead of when I open an email. So we're going to go through what that means. But essentially what that does is by enabling that, the content of any email that's sent to me that I'm receiving in my Apple Mail inbox is loaded on a remote server before it lands in my inbox. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, and again, I'm probably going to say things that many of you already know, but I'm going to talk about how open rates are traditionally calculated and like how we know if someone opened an email so that we can all be on the same page about like how loading the content on a remote server prevents us from knowing that having content loaded means that someone opened an email. So who does this apply to? The settings apply, or these settings apply only to users who opt in. So they do have to explicitly opt in. If they didn't do it when they initially downloaded the operating system, you can go into your device, go into your mail settings and enable any of these at any time. And it's also only for people, or it applies to people who have their email address, any email address, configured on Apple Mail on at least one of their Apple devices. So for example, I have several Apple devices. I have my personal email address, which is at Gmail. That address is configured on Apple Mail, on the Apple Mail app on my MacBook, and I use Gmail on my phone. But because I have the privacy setting enabled, which I think I did without even knowing like what the impact was like months ago, because I have the setting enabled and my Gmail address is tied to Apple Mail on my MacBook, then even though I use the Gmail client on my phone, I'm in the category of people whose open activity is obscured. So I, like the minute you send me an email, you're like, that will show as an open in your email stats, even though I may have not opened it, but it was loaded on a server before it was delivered to my inbox on my MacBook. So I say that because I think it is important to note that this doesn't just, and there was a little bit of like a misunderstanding on my part too. Like when this first came out, I was like, oh, so anyone we can just like treat anyone who has an iCloud.com address differently, or like an iCloud or at me or at Mac email address differently. But it doesn't just impact email addresses that are like hosted by Apple. It impacts anyone who's configured an email address with the Apple Mail application on any device. So now that we've covered that, we're going to talk about open rates, how they used to be calculated, how they're kind of like treated now with Apple Mail, and then we're going to get into the new features. So how does this impact OpenStats? So the first thing we have to understand as a group is how are open rates calculated. Any tool that does email blasting capabilities, so we're talking like NationBuilder, Constant Contact, MailChimp, they're all tracking opens in the same way. So the way that that is done is by including what is called a tracking pixel, but it's really just like a tiny transparent image in the body of any sent email. So you might send an email from NationBuilder that is just a paragraph of text and that's it. But what we are appending to that email and including in the body is a tiny, like 1x1 transparent image in the content of the email somewhere, so that when you send that image to, or you send that email to someone, when they open it on their device, it downloads the image from the NationBuilder servers, and that's how we know that an individual has opened the email. So it's like that triggering, the download being triggered, that's when we would then go back and update your open rates in NationBuilder and say, yep, this person opened the email because that tracking pixel was fired or downloaded from our server. And that's wonderful. We can like safely assume that they probably opened it. I say safely assume because open rates aren't a perfect science anyway. Like someone could have settings enabled where they don't download images on their email. And so that could prevent us from knowing that they opened an email. Or they are viewing the email and they don't have any like rich text enabled. So they just see like the plain text version of the email in their inbox. And so, for example, we can't track those opens. Again, these are problems that kind of like affect every email client, not just NationBuilder. So when a recipient opens the email, great, we download the tracking pixel and we know that that is marked as an open. So I have that You can see my beautiful clip art at the bottom. We send the email, they open the email, the pixel's downloaded, we add the open to your email stats. So this is how things were traditionally calculated. But of course, the new Apple Mail settings introduce a complexity to this, because if someone has the block remote content option enabled from Apple Mail privacy protection, then it loads the content on a server, not when they open the email. So basically, the email is sent to an individual. Apple loads all of the content, including the tracking pixel, on one of their servers, and then the email is delivered to the person's inbox. So the way that flow would work, if we never changed the way that open rates are calculated, and you might have seen this. So if you've seen over the course of maybe late January through February through March, if your open rates were creeping up and you're like, man, I am just killing it on email. I'm getting 40% open rates. I'm emailing prospects. I'm doing an incredible job. I have no doubt that everyone is doing an incredible job. However, the open rates were being inflated because as more people adopted this and were enabling the setting, there were basically server opens, emails that are being downloaded or emails that are being loaded by an Apple server that are triggering tracking or firing a tracking pixel that we were marking as an open, and that we're loading those into the control panel as traditional opens, in the same way we've always tracked those. So the open rates that you've been seeing over the last couple of months were including both human behavior, great, I open an email on my Gmail client and that is a real open and that's activity you want to track. But it was also including any what we were calling machine opens, where Apple was loading the content remotely before an individual even saw the email. So it was including a bunch of fake data, essentially, or false open data in your open rates, which, I mean, I love a high open rate, but it really doesn't mean anything if it's not indicative of the actual behavior of your supporters and doesn't really allow you to make good decisions about who you're emailing. Also, and I think I probably mentioned this in a bullet point, but in case I don't, in the world of email service providers like Yahoo, AOL, well, yeah, I guess they're the same thing now, but Gmail, cracking down constantly on make sure you're only sending to people who are engaged, make sure you're only sending to people who've received an email or who've opened an email from you in the last 90 days. Make sure you're only emailing people who have clicked on something recently. The guidelines and ways that they are choosing who lands in an inbox and who lands in a spam folder is constantly evolving and getting stricter, which I think everyone everywhere who's sending email is struggling with a little bit. That having unreliable data in your open rates and your email engagement just puts you in a position where achieving good email deliverability is even more of a struggle than it is when you have engagement data to begin with. So the things that we implemented are really driven around making your data actionable and indicative of supporter behavior. So the goals for these new features, of which there are 3, is to provide you with information that is reliable and accurate when it comes to has a human opened an email, which is the most important thing. I think everyone here knows that NationBuilder is very centered around individual people in your database. So that's why profiles are very robust. Everything that we do is very focused around human interaction and how are individual people engaging with you versus here's a massive list and just keep emailing them, but you don't really know who they are. So it's really important to us to provide you with data that is really indicative of true supporter behavior. It doesn't include machine data of email data, email images and content that's loaded on a server. We also want all of our customers to be able to see which of your supporters are impacted by privacy settings. So we introduced features that basically allow for you to see on a per profile basis, who has these settings enabled, because we have a new category that I'll dig into called open unverified, which basically means this person is in Apple Mail limbo. We don't really know. And I'll talk a little bit about how someone can move from like an unverified open to a verified open, because it can happen. But if someone is in this open unverified bucket, then we can actually identify who that person is, which is really great. And like a beautiful part about NationBuilder, which is that person could also be a donor. And then you're like, okay, well, they're an unverified open, but like they're a recurring donor. So like I can safely assume that they're engaged with my organization, like they're a supporter. So you have all of these other data points, which is really great. And you can see like on an individual basis who's impacted, which is really cool, and a cool thing that we're excited to be able to include in the product, just based off of like how NationBuilder works. And then finally, we're offering new filter criteria. So when you're building like your saved filters, like has opened an email in the last X number of days, or has clicked on some, whatever. When you're like building out your email filters to figure out who your engaged audience is, we introduce new filter criteria so you can also build filters to around the people who are in this like unverified bucket. And again, helps you with targeting and things like give me everyone who's in the unverified bucket, but like also has signed a petition, has like taken an action on this page, is a donor, all of these other things, kind of like coupling all those together to figure out like of the unverified people, this group is still very much part of the engaged audience based off of all this other activity. I'm going to stop there really quickly. Just before I dig into like each feature, I just want to check, and feel free to pop anything in the chat. Does anyone have any questions so far? I know I've been like kind of going on for 15 minutes. All right, cool. So I am going to keep going. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of the features. I'm also happy to go through these in a demo nation to just like show you how to find this data. So in the in a sent email blast, anytime you send an email out of NationBuilder, then you can see the recipients tab, and you can see the breakdown on a per profile basis, who has opened an email, who has clicked on an email, who unsubscribed, who, like which emails have bounced, all of those things you've always been able to do. And you can grab anyone who's on or anyone who's in any of those categories and add them to a list and kind of like dig into their behavior more if you want to. The change here is that we've added a new category under this section called Open Unverified. So you'll see it. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but I'm going to use it anyway. So you have the number of people who were sent an email. Then you have the number of people who opened your email. And then you have the number of people who have not opened the email. And that's great. But then you have the Open Unverified section. And so if we send an email blast to 10 people, and 5 of those people have Apple Mail privacy protection enabled, and the email address that we sent to is configured on their Apple Mail, or is configured on Apple Mail on any of their devices, then those 5 people will show up in this Open Unverified column. That's basically just a way for you to know, hey, I'm potentially not going to see the open activity for these people. And we're not putting them in the unopened category because any of these individuals could open an email theoretically, but if they use exclusively Apple Mail as their client, so like they use Apple Mail on their phone and their Mac, and they don't use any other tool to open that email, then we will never, and they have the setting enabled, we will never be able to know if they open the email or not. It's just information that will never be made available to us. So we have to rely on other information. Ideally, like, did they click something in the email? However, the fun part is that someone can move from being an open unverified to an open. So how can that happen? If I'll go back to my example. So I have my personal email, which is like danajlanders@gmail.com. You can feel free to email me there. So I have my personal email, and I have it configured on my MacBook on Apple Mail. So I don't even use the Apple Mail app. I just set it up, I think, when I was like setting up my MacBook, and I added my email because I was prompted to, and I don't think I've ever opened the app since, but it's there. Email flows into that inbox, even though I never open it there. What I do instead is I have the Gmail app on my phone, and I open email on my, or I receive email on my phone, and I interact with it through the Gmail app. The benefit of that is there's no issue with how we track opens on Gmail. There's no setting that like loads content on a remote server. It just works the way it always has. So when you send me an email on my, or at danajlanders@gmail.com, then it will initially populate as an open unverified because Apple Mail has loaded the content remotely. We know that that's the case. We get a flag when an open comes back. The way that this works basically is we get a record of the open activity, like the image is downloaded, and there's a flag of like, this was downloaded by a server, or this was downloaded on a device, essentially. So there's just like a flag that we can use to figure out if it's an Apple Mail open or like a machine open versus a person. So I'm initially going to pop into that open unverified column, but then 2 hours later, I'm scrolling through email on my phone, and I open the email on my Gmail app. Well, that fires the tracking pixel from opening the email on the Gmail app, which will then move me from being in the open unverified category to the open category. So there is hope, like you can potentially still see open activity for individuals who have these settings enabled. It's just dependent on whether or not they use multiple different clients to view their email. So if they use something in conjunction with Apple Mail, then wonderful. Then they may open your email on their Gmail app, on Outlook, through the yahoo.com like interface, any of those different options. As long as they're doing that in like outside of Apple Mail. I feel like I started with like the most confusing one, but I also feel like this is one we had to talk about first before I go into the other two features. So I'm going to pause there and just see if anyone has questions about that. I also will send around, and some of you may have seen it. There's an extensive, it's like the longest blog post I think I've ever written, but it's an extensive blog post that I will send around after this. Oh, that's a good question. Yes. So if someone interacts with the email in a different way too, then we will also move them to the open category. That's a good call out, Sheila. Thank you. Yeah. So if they, if they click, then yes, they'll be moved to an open. And I think also if they unsubscribe, unfortunately, then we also know that they open the email in order to unsubscribe. But that's the way it would have always worked anyway. You have to open the email to unsubscribe it. All right. Johnny, I see your question. Has the email new recipients category been launched yet? And I'm not sure if I'm missing something on the NationBuilder side, or I'm like just not thinking about something or blanking, but could you elaborate on that?
I guess I just meant that the new recipients category. So what you're showing us, this is already part of NationBuilder. I can pull these reports, or we can look at these reports. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Sorry. I totally misunderstood your question. Yes. So all of these changes went live, I think at the beginning of last week. So you should be able to see all of these updates. Yep. The 12th. So last Tuesday. So any email that you've seen, like in the last week or so, for example, should have the new open rate calculation that we'll talk about. But yes, you can come in here and start to see which profiles are landing in that open unverified section. Awesome. Well, keep the questions coming in the chat. I'm going to move on to the next feature. The next two are potentially less complicated than this, but so we have also adjusted the open rate. So the thing that I wanted to, or that I mentioned before, and the thing that's really important to keep in mind here is that the open rate is something like anytime you're going to like the email stats page, you should be able to see, here's an email I sent, here are all the ways in which people interacted with it outside of like bounced emails and spam. But things like your open rate, your click rate, your unsubscribe rate, those are all things that should be indicative of like actual people interacting with your email. And the open rate just wasn't reflecting that. So I know that like every email client has kind of treated Apple Mail privacy a little bit differently. We wanted to make sure that the data that customers were seeing is accurate and representative. And I know I'm like really beating a dead horse on this, but it factored very heavily into how we built out these features. We wanted to make sure that the data that you're seeing is like a real representation of how people are engaging with your email. Also, just because, in my opinion, which you can take it or leave it, but I think it's much more helpful to see open data that is like, representative of how people are interacting with your email, even though we might be leaving out some opens because from like the Apple Mail side, because we just don't know if they opened it or not. But I'd rather have a slightly lower open rate that shows me directionally how I'm doing with email than like a 50% open rate that's like pretty much guaranteed to be half fluff. So I think from a reporting perspective, like I know that can be a hit, especially if like the last month and a half we've been like, man, it's open rates, they've been great. But it's really just not indicative of like how people are engaging. And so it was really important to us, and we were getting that feedback from customers too, that they were like, I know that a lot of this data is not real. And so how do I make sure that the data that I'm seeing is real? So what we've done is remove the unverified open activity from the way that the open rate is calculated. So this does one of two things. One, represents human data only. Two, it also gives you an idea of like, if this is how people who aren't using Apple Mail are opening email, then we can pretty safely assume, like if 12%, I mean, that's a meh open rate, but if 12% of people are opening my email outside of any of the Apple Mail data, then let me go ahead and like assume that roughly 12% of the people who receive the email on Apple Mail are also opening it. So it gives you an idea, like just something to measure on, like, is your open rate increasing? Is it decreasing? Give you a sense of like how your email's performing. But it's more of like a metric that you can use to just kind of as like a temperature check. Whereas tracking click rates and like actual conversions of like calls to action, those are things that are going to be much more meaningful moving forward, even though that's always been the goal, right? But open rates are passive. Like I open an email all the time. If I'm just going through Gmail, I'm like opening emails and I'm like, oops, didn't mean to open that. And then I move on to the next one. I didn't even look at the email. So anyway, the way that the open rate is currently calculated, we are removing the open unverified number from both the open, like the, from the entire calculation, essentially. So if we send an email to 100 people and 20 of those people are in this open unverified category, we're removing them from both like the numerator and the denominator from the calculation for the open. So we're saying like, hey, all that activity, take all of that out. We're just tracking the people who we know, like we got to their inbox. They weren't bounced back as like or not bounced back, but they weren't flagged as like an unverified open. Like they didn't land on like an Apple Mail server. So of the people who actually opened the email where the tracking pixel fired, and we know that they engaged with it in some way, we're dividing that number by the total number of people for whom we can track email activity. So again, that's why I say that like you can still treat the number as like a trend, like is my number going up or down, because we're calculating it based out of the people for whom we can even see open activity. I know that's a little confusing. We have like a lot more documentation on it if you want to take a look at just like how the open rate's being calculated. But what we didn't want to do was basically just take like the number of people who've opened it, like, and get like for whom we can see a real open and divide it by the total number of sent emails, because that's not really a fair number to calculate it out of either, because there could be people who actually opened it and they're in that open unverified category. And then you're really looking at like a lower number. And you're like, okay, why is my open rate 8%? So I see, okay, I see a couple questions have come in. I'm going to pause there. And it looks like there was one that you wanted to bring up. Let me see.
Yeah, so Kevin was just wondering if the recommendation for people who don't have any other apps would be that they kind of adopt another app. My answer, and I'd love to hear yours, Dana, was that, you know, technically, yes, that would be a way to help you understand. But given what we're talking about here, I think hopefully there are other ways that you could help folks engage in a way that either move them into that category or like generally get involved, right? So like make a donation, sign up for an event.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you could, so we'll talk about this a little bit, like some messaging you can use to individuals in particular who are landing in this open unverified category. At the end of the day, they opted into privacy settings. So there's a decent chance, and like in the world of ever evolving like privacy regulations and like people wanting to protect their information, there's a world where people are like, could be potentially turned off if we're like, hey, we can't see if you're opening our email, like download another app so we can see your email. And I know that's not what you're saying, but I think it's like a fine line of like reaching out to people and being like, hey, do you still want to hear from us, while still respecting their choice to have their email engagement hidden. Like they made that decision. Unfortunately, it's a blanket decision that affects all senders, not just, so in a perfect world, they could be like, I want you to be able to see my activity because I want you to determine if I should still receive email from you or not. Like, but it, you know, it's a blanket, like universal thing. So they may be making the decision of like, I don't want Old Navy to keep seeing the email to see whether or not I open their emails, or like Amazon, but you know, so unfortunately, like no one can see my open activity anymore. We do have recommendations though that we'll get into in a minute around how we can use basically the like the new features and some language around the new privacy settings to run like a campaign targeting those individuals specifically, to make sure that they kind of like confirm their engagement. All right, so it looks like there's a question. Does NationBuilder have a view for the proportion of emailers universally, which are configured in Apple Mail or by country? We don't. You could run filters for individuals who are in the open unverified category, which I'm going to get into in a second, and then couple that with country. We don't have like a universal view. And as far as views of individuals who are configured in Apple Mail, the only two places that you'll be able to see that are either through a filter, which we added a new criteria for, or within an email blast that you've sent, and you can see the open unverified tab. And then Amira, I see your question. So to clarify, the sent number will still be the same. It's the way the open figure is configured that is changing. Yes, so that is like a little bit of a confusing thing. And that's why we added this tooltip that says like, we're calculating the open rate using only verified data. So historically, all of the numbers that you see along the email stats panel, so like opens, clicks, bounce, spam, unsubscribe, well, donations is in there, but that's not calculated using anything other than donations. So all of those numbers used to be calculated with like the count of that thing. So like how many people marked you as spam, ideally 0. How many emails bounced, how many people unsubscribed, how many people opened, how many people clicked, out of the total number of sent. individuals or a total number of people you sent to. Open rates now are not calculated out of that sent number, but they're the only one impacted. So like the sent number stays the same. It's the total number of people you sent to, Apple Mail or not. And then clicks and all of the other stats don't change because none of them are impacted by Apple Mail. The open rate, however, is calculated out of the people for whom we can see activity. So anyone who's not returned as an unverified open.
Yep. And then Dana, Nicole's question is, can you show us in the product where to go so that they can find the verified open number? I think her question is mainly around that denominator. So I think if I'm understanding her question correctly, we could use the unverified open filter in order to understand what that number was if you wanted to find it out.
Yeah, so where we can find the verified open number. Yes, so the way that you can like see, so the way that it's calculated essentially is the opened over the opened plus the unopened number. That's the way that the open rate is now calculated. So it's like add these two numbers together, which this is like not a good example because that could be like, this could be 3 and one of these individuals could be an Apple Mail recipient. And so this would be like 1, 1, 1. These 3 numbers, open, unopened, and open unverified, all 3 of those would add up to your sent number. But the open rate will be calculated as 50% because it would be 1 person opened out of 2 people for whom we can track activity. And then anyone in this open unverified category would be removed from that calculation. If you were like, if you wanted to kind of like compare the like what your open rate would have been if the machine opens and like the unverified opens were factored into it and like the way that it like would have been before, it would be grab all 3 of these numbers and then divide that by the total number of sent.
I think we're all up to date. Should be good.
Okay, great. Yep, Nicole, exactly. So the way to see that breakdown is just in the recipients tab, or if you do run a filter and you can see the unverified individuals, but that would be probably for like additional targeting. Okay, speaking of, the last component of this is new filter criteria. So I'm sure that each of you have run different filters based off of email behavior. So you can see like open an email blast in the last X days, months, years, has not opened an email blast, has opened a specific email blast, didn't open a specific email blast, all that good stuff. Your open filters will now just track the verifiable open data. So if you're looking at like has opened an email blast in the last 90 days, it's going to return people for whom a tracking pixel fired because they opened an email on their device through the Gmail app, through Apple Mail, but they didn't have the settings enabled. Because again, this is all based off of the settings. Someone could have Apple Mail and they're like, nope, I don't care, track whatever. So the open filter will now return just people who have a verified open, so we can tell that their content was loaded on their device. Meaning that they did open the email. But we also added a new filter criteria for open is unverified. I know that there was a whole thing about the way that this filter language is presented. So if you're looking at this and you're like, that's not my favorite way to put it, I get it. You should have seen some of the options that we had. So this is where we landed. But so and we may iterate on this and like change the filter, but for now, open is unverified in any of the email blasts, and then you can choose your broadcaster and you can choose this date range. So the unverified version of the open filter is available for like, it has opened an email blast from a broadcaster, has opened a specific email blast, all that stuff, which is so helpful if you're trying to build like your engaged audience. So I know many NationBuilder customers we'll send email to a saved filter, or we'll send email to like a tag that you're auto tagging people with if they meet filter criteria for like they've engaged with email. If you are doing either of those things, then consider taking a look at this filter in the next couple weeks and coupling it with things like if you're accepting donations, are they a donor? Have they engaged with a certain page recently? Did they interact, like have they attended an event? Have they like signed one of your petitions? Like whatever ways people commonly interact with your organization on your website or through donations, couple those with this open unverified filter to try to find people who are still engaging with you, like through website activity, through other means. Maybe like they were last contacted by you. Maybe you're like calling people and you're an organization that's like actively engaging with volunteers and phone banking. So if any of that's happening, you can use this filter in tandem with additional action filters and find your audience who's still engaged with you through other means. So just because you can't see their email open activity definitely doesn't mean that you can't tell if they're a supporter or not. And honestly, whether or not someone's opening your email isn't a real indicator that they're engaging with you anyway. So like I said, I open emails before I delete them. It's like literally my process of in the Gmail app, I open an email and then I delete, and I know I'm just filling a bunch of like, I'm sure the Banana Republic hates me because I keep opening email and not ever looking at it. But it's just the way that the data is presented now, it is a little bit more directionally accurate, so you can tell who might actually be engaging versus the unverified data that we don't really know. So with that, a couple of things to keep in mind, and we've touched on it on some of these. So again, people can move from the open unverified section to the open section and be considered a real open if they open your email on a client other than Apple Mail. There are people in that unverified section who might be engaging with your email, but we will never know if they're only opening it on Apple Mail. So it's just information that we don't have access to. Nobody does. It's something you're going to run into on any platform that you send email from. And then finally, and I knew I had a bullet point about this, email service providers are constantly cracking down. So having the ability to differentiate who really opened an email versus who didn't open an email, but Apple Mail is making it look like they did, is really important for you in terms of making sure that your email deliverability remains high and you're landing in people's inboxes, because you're respecting people's engagement with email. You're not sending to people who haven't opened an email in a year. You know, you have the tools available to you to make sure that you're segmenting properly. So in the last few minutes that we have, we're going to talk about how to maximize engagement. So we're talking a lot about making sure that people are engaging with your email in other meaningful ways. And that's a beautiful thing to say and a hard thing to put in practice. So meaningful success metrics. Open rates are just like an industry standard thing to track. And I really don't think that's going to be the case for long. With the introduction of Apple Mail privacy, there's always the chance that other email clients might introduce similar policies and block this type of tracking. So it's much more likely to go in that direction than to get more information about supporters. So it's just unlikely that this is going to be a long-standing measure of success. It's also really a vanity metric. Like, it's not, if someone's opening your email, but they're not clicking anything, then that means honestly that I know click rates are really hard to get. They're just, it's tough. A good click rate, well, historically, although I think it's going to increase now with this, a good click rate has always been like, oh, if you get over 2%, yay, people are engaging with your email. Now so other like players in this space and like consultants around email and all of that, they're aiming for click rates of like 7%, which is crazy high. But it's a good indicator that people are engaging with your content, obviously. So open rates they're also not always reliable. And I know I mentioned that, but like it never has been a perfect science. It's always been a best guess. So like we can see for the most part that people are engaging with email, like, like because the tracking pixel's firing. But again, if they have images disabled in Outlook or they're receiving email in plain text, then like we can't see that information anyway. So it's important to try as hard as you can and do a little bit of like a behavioral change. And I know that this is tough, especially if you're reporting out stats to stakeholders. Focus on conversions. So is someone clicking your email? Are you making a donation? Are they doing the call to action? Signing your petition, answering your survey, whatever it is? Are they taking that action? Because that's the whole point that you're emailing them, is to try to get them to do something. So are they doing that thing? So let's talk about some ways to do that. So content of email is obviously the best way to figure out a way to get people to click things. So a couple of like recommendations. So include, I will say this until the day I die, although I'm sure email will change many times between now and then. If you're including a link and you want people to do things in the email, there's this like methodology that is weird, but it works. Include, like, link everything, like put, have like a paragraph about like a petition that you're sending around, and then be like, it's time to act now at the end of that paragraph. Hyperlink the sentence in that paragraph that says like it's time to act now, or like click here to sign the petition today. Hyperlink that text and then follow it up with a button that's hyperlinked. And then even better, throw an image, not just one image. Don't like overload your emails with images, but include an image and hyperlink the image. People are all different. Like, we're all different learners. I was joking with someone who I think is on the webinar who works at NationBuilder just before this about the fact that I was like, I could do this without a deck. Like, I could just do everything in product. And she was like, I would not be able to follow along with that because I need to look at a deck and understand, like, that's like how my brain works. Every single person that you're sending an email to is totally different. Everyone's going to click on different stuff. You would be shocked to know like that, like how spread out it is between like what are people clicking. So hyperlink a bunch of stuff, but like people for the most part love buttons. So try to include a button in your email if you're asking people to do something, and don't be like click here. Like include something in the button of like sign the petition, like include the call to action and what you're asking people to do in the button. Don't include, this is like, people will have feelings about this, I'm sure, but this is like a recommendation that's been thrown around in a bunch of places, and I do agree. Newsletters are a very, very popular like point of value for organizations to provide to recipients. The downside of a newsletter, outside of the fact that people are probably unlikely to scroll in an email, they're just not going to do it. People have short attention spans, is the fact that if you're providing all of your value of an email in the content of the email, you're a very charitable person. And also, they have no reason to click through the email and actually go to your website and like read more. So try to, like, if you are sending like really meaty emails with a lot of information and people are getting a lot out of the content, then that's beautiful. But if they care about the content and they're reading all of it anyway, then we should be directing them back to your site, because not only will that count as a click, but also then they'll be on your site and then maybe they'll poke around at some stuff. But like post a blog on your site and then post a snippet of it or like a headline in your email, and then do a read more link and have a call to action and drive them back to the site to read the rest of the content. So include information in your email that's helpful, obviously. Don't send fluff, but try to link people back to your site as much as you can, instead of including everything someone might need to know in the body of the email. For the people who care and the people who are interested, if they were going to read the content anyway, they're going to click the link and go to your site. If they don't care and they aren't going to click through, then they probably weren't reading the content in your email anyway, even if they opened it. Try creative content. This is a little bit of a bait and switch. I have mixed feelings about it, but it works. So I'm going to share it. You can't embed content in your email. So you can't embed like a video. Well, I mean, you can embed content, but you can't embed like a YouTube video, for example, in the body of your email. But what you can do, and this is a very common practice, is take a thumbnail of the video that looks like it's gonna, if you click, it's gonna play the video like it's embedded, and throw that in your email as an image and just hyperlink it out to the video. Even better, embed the video on your site on NationBuilder or like on a NationBuilder page, and then have people click and then they view the video, not on YouTube, but on your NationBuilder website or on your page. You know, so that way they can like click around, and again, they watch the video, they're like, ooh, interesting. And then they like go to your top nav and they start clicking around to other things. But we also have, you know, like embed content and media in the email, or like seemingly embed content in the email that is like media or that require a click. Action buttons are a great way to do this. So if, for those of you who don't know, NationBuilder acquired a company called the Action Button. They're a cool little, it's like an add-on that you can purchase, but it's like a little button where you can do like sentiment polling or like quick quizzes, but they're cool because they're anonymized, which I know is like weird for NationBuilder, but it's truly the only way you can collect anonymized feedback for NationBuilder. Everything else is tied to email. But you can do a cool thing about like, oh, like click here to tell us which topic you care most about in 2022, and someone will click and you can embed the button on your site, and so they click the image, it will take them to the button, but you capture that click. And then finally, do some A/B testing for content, which is not a feature that we have. I will clear that up. We have A/B testing in subject lines. We do not have A/B testing in content, but it's very easy to do. Make 2 versions of the same email, do different button placement, link placement, do images in one and not the other, like all those sorts of things. And then just take your audience, split it in half, like add them to a list, split the list in half, send one half to one group, one half to the other group, and see what happens. Confirm interest for those who are unverified. So reconfirmation campaigns are something that I'm sure many of you are aware of. Some of you may have run, some of you may or might not have run. If you are an organization that is strictly adhered to the guidelines of GDPR, then a reconfirmation campaign is definitely not new to you, but it's a way of checking in with people who haven't engaged in email in a long time. And now is a way of checking in with people who are in this open unverified category. So if someone is constantly landing in this open unverified section of your email recipients tab, and you just don't know really if they want to receive your email anymore because you can't tell if they're engaging at all, they're not clicking, nothing, then target those individuals. And I'm not a copywriter, do not use this language, but use your own version of it. But send them an email and say like, hey, due to recent privacy updates, we can't see whether or not you're opening our email and whether or not you want to continue receiving email from us. If you do want to, click here, which is great because you capture the click. And then you also can like direct them to a quick thing like, hey, complete this survey and tell us what you care about, so we make sure we're sending you the most relevant content. Very, very impactful method of capturing that information, and a great use of using the workflows feature of NationBuilder. So like put someone on a workflow for a reconfirmation campaign, set up a conversion in that workflow. So if someone and set up a sign up page where people can go and say, yep, I totally want to receive email. They click on the link in the email that they get, like the first email in the workflow. And then they submit a sign up page saying like, yep, I want to continue receiving email from you. And then we have some self-tagging options. So like, yep, I care about, my example is crafting. So like I care about knitting and cross stitch. And so send me content about those. I submit the form, I'm converted in that workflow. Anyone who doesn't submit the form, we can send them a follow-up email and say, hey, just making sure you saw this. Are you still interested in receiving email from us? Finally, last slide. I know we're at time. Filter your individuals who are in this unverified section. So just use that filter as an opportunity in a way to take advantage of the integrated system that you have with NationBuilder to say, you know what, I can't see your open rate, like your open activity for email, but what I can do is see if you're interacting with us in other ways. So are you making donations? Are you RSVPing to events? Are you doing these other things? And then you can design your outreach based off of whether or not people fall into those categories, in addition to being in this like open unverified section. All right, that is it. I know we're at time. I'm happy to hang on for like 5 more minutes if anyone has any additional questions. So I'll keep an eye on the chat, but anyone can feel free to unmute as well if you want to jump in with anything.
Dana, just to lift up, Tristan's last question was, if someone does have the privacy setting on and they do open, does that count as an open?
It won't. If they have the privacy setting on and they open the email and they can open it 14 times in Apple Mail, it will not show up in your open calculation because we don't receive any of that information about whether or not they actually open the email. If they do click anything in the email, they'll move to an open. But the whole point of the privacy setting, like very unfortunately, is just that if they're opening things in Apple Mail and they have the setting enabled, that information is not available to us at any point.
And otherwise, just to make sure I answer correctly, it'll be in the unverified open tab.
Yes, unverified open tab, unless they click, in which case they will move to being an open and a click, because then they would have had to open it in order to click.
Gotcha. Thanks. That makes sense.
Yes, I'll send the slide deck around as part of the follow-up, and that blog post I mentioned, and the support article that touches on the more complex stuff around like the open rate calculation, all of that. Mike, I see your note about iPads not being or iPad content not recognized by the system. Would you mind elaborating on that?
Yeah, what happens is you catch an embarrassing typo and you go in and change it under the content screen. You hit save and then you look, and sometimes it'll enter and sometimes it won't. And sometimes part of the changes enter and sometimes it makes it even worse. So what I have to do is go into the HTML, the source, copy the whole thing, cut it, save changes so you get a blank, and then paste the HTML back in again. And sometimes if you forget to do that, you get kind of a mess. And I'm not sure, it's not something that always happens, but it happens like I'd say 80% or more of the time.
Gotcha. So, but on an iPad specifically?
Yeah.
Okay. That's a good note. I'll flag that for our team.
And another thing is I'd like a feature where if somebody reports you as spam, that you have the option to not let them rejoin again and then re-report you as spam. Because I think, people could be doing that either unintentionally or intentionally, but it'd be good to kind of clear that out. So, we don't want to bother people who feel that we're spam and accidentally resubscribe. And we certainly don't want to have people who are kind of like trolling us by doing that.
Yeah. That's that latter point specifically about the trolling. A lovely new update in the world that we live in.
Imagine that.
Cool. No, that's helpful feedback, Mike. I appreciate it. I'll definitely share that with our team.
I also want to thank you for this presentation. That you made some very complicated subject matter, very transparent and easy to understand. So thank you for being really good at your job.
Oh, thank you so much for joining. No, I appreciate that all of you were able to make it today. I know that this is like a pretty significant update that also came pretty quickly, but I think it's so much better than having inflated data that isn't truly indicative of how people are engaging. So I'm excited about it. I think it's a little bit of a shift in how we manage email, but I think it's going to be good. And Sally, I see your question about the blog. I will definitely share that around. I should have the follow-up email out by the end of day today. And I'll include the link out to the blog, the support articles, and I will also include a link to the slide deck as well. Any other questions before we jump off? And you'll all have my email too. I sent the late night reminder about this webinar last night from my email address. So anyone can feel free to reach out to me directly if you do have questions. Our support team is all trained up on this too. Or for any of you who are enterprise customers and have an account manager, our account management team is up to speed on all these changes. All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate your time. I hope that this was helpful, and we'll see you on the next webinar, whenever that is. Have a great day, everybody.